So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on from which place have you joined this webinar. First of all, thank you for taking time to attend this webinar. Before we actually start this webinar, I wanted to discuss or give you a brief description about what we are going to cover in this webinar so that we are all covered. So this webinar, as the topic suggests, is about separating product search RFP from implementation RFP. Now, before we start this, whenever any association is, or whenever your association is looking to either replace the existing AMS or looking to implement a new AMS, we generally float RFPs looking for a perfect AMS for us. Okay. Now, when we are looking for an AMS, we often forget that there are two parts to it, right? So the first part is selecting the right AMS, which actually fits in your requirements from an organizational point of view, right? And then the second part is actually implementing that AMS into your org so that whatever you have implemented matches your expectations. Okay. So these two parts are very, very important. Now, what we generally do or what associations generally tend to do is float a single RFP, which mainly talks about choosing an AMS, right? Now, when you're choosing an AMS, obviously you are looking for either implementing Fontiva or Nimble or maybe IMS or Wild Apricot, whatever you choose as an AMS. It's very important to choose the right partner to implement it, right? So sometimes it's the product company or the AMS company that you have chosen, but sometimes it's always helpful to look for other options because they might actually help you a lot, right? So what we are going to do in this webinar is discuss on why we should actually, or why associations should actually consider separating these two RFPs and look for different options. So we will evaluate a lot of parameters, and to evaluate these parameters and talk more about it, we have a very special guest with us who has been with the association for around 20 years. So please welcome Stefanie. So Stefanie is a Chief Information Officer at American Psychiatric Association. She's a dynamic and results-oriented leader with, as I told you, with over 2 decades of experience driving organizational success through innovation strategies and effective decision-making. She brings in a lot of experience in technology transformation, process optimization, and compliance in the ever-evolving cybersecurity landscape. She is a former member of the Technology Professionals Advisory Council with the American Society of Association Executives. Welcome, Stefanie, to the webinar and taking time to educate our audience on why we should actually think of separating these two RFPs.
Great, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's nice to join everyone.
And I am Neeraj Garg, and I am the global CEO at Aplusify. I have 2 decades of experience working alongside a multi-talented team to help enterprises drive digital transformation within their organization, enabling them to be more innovative, agile, and customer-centric. I lead an internal task force that shares lessons learned, best practices, and practical applications that relate to different types of enterprises. With over 300 developers on my side, we provide clients with resources and associations capacity to power up their teams. So I think we have set the base. So moving on to the next slide. So as you can see, right, what we are trying to do is evaluating on whether we should actually go with the AMS implementation partner with the product company or the AMS product company that we have chosen, or we should look for other options in terms of having a separate partner to implement it, right? So before we actually start evaluating it and take opinion from Stefanie based on her real-time experience on what way should we go, what is better for us in what situations. We want to launch a quick poll to understand the audience in terms of their AMSs and how they actually look in terms of that RFP. So can we have the poll question, please? So this is the poll question. What factors are most critical for your organization when selecting an AMS product? Is it integrating with existing systems, or is it customization and scalability? Is it user experience and accessibility? Is it reporting and analytics? So let's give everyone around 30 seconds to fill up this. And we have a message from Jonathan who says I've clicked the wrong poll. So that's fine. We are still, people are answering the poll. So let's wait for a few more seconds. We are getting good response from everyone. I think we can end the poll now. We have got a lot of answers. So can we display the results for the poll? What does they depict? Yeah, so we have got around 40% audience who think that the most critical part is integrating with existing systems. Then 22% say that customization is very important for them. 30% audience think that user experience is more important, and then 7% thinks that reporting and analytics is important. So I think that's good. That's good to understand, Stefanie, on what people are thinking. I think mostly it's more about customization and integration and scalability that they are more concerned about in terms of AMS implementation. So let's start with the evaluation parameters. So we have taken 6 parameters into consideration, which we think are important to evaluate whether we should go with a product company vendor or a third-party vendor. So let's go to the first parameter, industry experience. So Stefanie, what do you think in terms of a vendor? How much important is industry experience for him when when associations like you are actually considering a vendor for implementation? Does it take a lot of weightage in terms of he has got that domain knowledge or industry experience?
Sure. I think industry experience is really a key factor. I've been fortunate to work with different vendors for implementation in these types of services. And one of the things that I think is important to understand is that one size doesn't fit all. And it's really important as you go down this road to make this evaluation and begin to determine it, that you really do, you complete an assessment of your environment, right? And you define what your needs and requirements are, because that will help you as you're evaluating potential vendors, right? You really need to know your team, your environment, and also, I think, reach out to a lot of folks as you're evaluating that, just confirming industry experience, and with also vendors that you haven't met yet, right? So I think that's important.
So just out of curiosity, Stefanie, when you are evaluating vendors based on industry experience, what things do you look for in that vendor? Do you actually interview them? Do you take references in terms of whether they have got that kind of exposure in working with associations like trade associations or professional associations or maybe smaller size associations? So how do you evaluate that in terms of industry experience?
So I do look at the organizations they've worked with. I look at what are the strengths of potential vendors. Are they really good with design? Are they really good with customization? What's the availability of their key staff throughout the lifetime of this project? And I know we'll get into more of that as we talk today. And for me, do they have a reputation for being a true partner? Do they want us to succeed? And see how their strengths will complement any in-house staff you have and fill in those holes.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think most of the times, Stephanie, what we have found from our side is when as a I can talk as in terms of a supplier, right? So when our team is actually talking to a lot of association clients, right? So one thing that we have improved in the years that we have been working with associations is getting that domain knowledge, because there are some technical nuances, right, in terms of association parameters, what they look for. Uh, there might be a problem which might sound very uh, simple for us, but it would sound as a complex problem in terms of their clients for us. So I think that kind of learning from associations actually helps. And I think obviously that is why industry experience is important for the supplier to understand, right?
Very much so. Yeah, and associations, as everyone on the call knows, are their own animal. It's very different than looking at for-profit support for this. So yeah.
So I think you talked about customization when we talk about the vendor. So I think let's go to the next parameter where we talk about the customization capability. I know that a lot of when you actually go and implement AMS for associations, there is not just one stakeholder. I think there are multiple stakeholders within the association, right? It's not that I'm just talking to Stephanie and Stephanie is my only stakeholder, right? You will have finance guys, you will have marketing guys, you will have events guys, everyone giving their input. And I think everyone has that kind of separate requirements which they want to actually see fulfilled when we implement AMS. And I think that is where a lot of customizations come, because everyone has a different view of the business processes that need to be implemented for that association, right? So when we float, I think we think that it would be just out of the box, but then suddenly it is a Pandora box where everyone has a different requirement to come, and that is where it's very difficult to avoid customization. And so, how do you perceive that in terms of uh, selecting a vendor based on customization? I know product companies are very good at implementing out of the box, but when it comes to customization, they're miles apart, right? They don't want to do that.
Right. So for me, customization is a double-edged sword, right? It's necessary for a lot of things in business, but I think from the customer perspective, which helps the implementation partner, is that you don't want to use customization as a way to avoid evaluating or streamlining your business processes. So I just have to sort of put that out there as a public service announcement, right? But my concern around customization capability is, can they do it? Is really learning from the implementation vendor. How have they done it before? To your point about industry experience, how have they done it before? How well do they know the product that you've selected? And as we talk through that, will they help me as an organization prioritize my customizations? If I give a list of requirements and they come back and say, there are 20 items on this list, your top 5, you really should spend the money on the customization. But these other ones, let's talk about how we can help your staff do them with what's off the shelf with this product, because you know it very well. So I think knowledge about it is super important. Having the bench to be able to complete the customizations versus us competing for resources, that's really important when you manage your timelines later. And in addition to that, I mean, I really just, I made a little note here is, can they do it and will they help you avoid it? Right? Do you have the kind of partnership where they will look at that list to to my point and say, yeah, these top 5, we really should customize the rest of these. Let's have a different conversation. And I think that's where you start to build the true partnership that makes this part of an implementation run more smoothly.
Yeah. And in terms of associations, right? So I know that every association, when it buys an AMS, right, they have a demo of that product, right, which the product company gives you. And generally, I think if they meet around more than 90 or maybe around 90% of your requirements for the associations, you generally choose that product. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, so it's more about, we say that 90% of the product features have been matched, and only around 10% is there where we feel that there would be some kind of customization required, right? And that is why we choose that product. But what based on our experience, what we have seen is that when we actually go for the real implementation with associations, right? We also think that we will implement a vanilla out of the box uh, feature for either Fontiva, Nimbra, or whatever AMS it is, right? Because it's easy for us. We just have to implement it and install it. And there would be less bugs in it because obviously it's a product out of the box feature. But when we actually go to these discovery calls with a lot of stakeholders, right? That is when we realize that everyone has a different requirement altogether, which is not a part of the out of the box feature. Because I think when you are evaluating the software, I think not all these stakeholders are involved in the evaluation process, maybe, right? And when you actually buy that AMS, then everyone gets involved, right? Because they actually want to use that product. So how do you manage that, right? Because everyone wants out of the box, but ultimately it becomes that 60% is out of the box and then 40% you have customized.
Sure. How do you manage that? It's a lot of internal work as the customer ahead of time. It's creating buy-in at the CEO or president level. It is all about going around and learning and discovering and writing, completing your own discovery first, so that you know what you have, and those stakeholders that pop up to the implementation meeting and say, oh, well, I need this. Sometimes they weren't available when you tried to hear from them before the transaction was completed, before you signed the contract, because you're right, it does pop up. In fact, when you said you think most people will sign if a potential vendor meets 90% of their requirements, I think it's probably a little lower than that, at least with the organizations I've worked with. It's because there were so many customizations and so many things to think about. So I think you need to prepare ahead of time, and I think you need to really have buy-in from the internal team that they're going to stop and think and write down their processes. And I like to say to folks, look, pretend you won the lottery and you're being courteous enough to write down what you do, how you do it, and why you do it, so that we can determine if it's going to be a customization in a new system.
Yeah, that's true. And in terms of when you are actually when you have floated the RFP and you have selected a product, right? So you decide to go. Suppose you decide to go with the product vendor, right? Because you know that there is a lot of less customization that I would want the system to do. But then all of a sudden you realize that the customization has increased. Okay. And then the product vendor is obviously pushing you out in terms of not getting customization done, right? So what has been your experience in getting the customizations done from the product vendor versus the third implementation vendor? Because I know you have worked with both, right? You have got experience on both the sides, working with the product vendor as well as the third party vendor. So how are they different in the approach of customization?
What I have found in leading projects both ways is that the product vendor doesn't always seem to have an implementation team capability that matches what we've needed. And it's because they say off the shelf, we know that 6 months is a valid and proven time frame when this is an off the shelf type project, right? When there are no customizations. So I would say if you are 100% sure that you are not going to customize anything, that's one way to go. But I haven't met anyone along my journey here that would say, oh, we didn't customize anything. They're just, I haven't, and if that person is on this webinar, I'd love to have lunch sometime, right? But because of the customizations, I think you are much better off with an implementation partner who has had to do it more. I think they're more in tune with finding solutions for whatever your requirement is that's not out of the box. Is that helpful?
No, I think that's very helpful, Stephanie. And I think just a sequence of this question in terms of when you implement a product, right? So we have implemented an AMS. Now these AMSs have definite release patches that they release, right? Depending on what is missing in their product, right? So you have implemented Fontiva, and then there is something which is not working for the membership renewal, then you raise it as a ticket. Now, what we have seen is that process of implementing something which is not a part of their product, right? And when you raise a ticket, right, that takes a lot of time because they are not very comfortable in releasing a intermediate patch for it, right? They wait for that release cycle to get that implemented, and by that time, I think we have seen a lot of associations getting anxious because that is something that their members require, and that is where I think customizations happen, right? Where they don't want to wait for that next cycle and then ask the third-party vendor to just implement some kind of customized code. I think that is the main problem area that happens.
Right, and I don't fault a vendor for having a specific cycle, and because they're trying to keep the product stable, because what one organization needs as a customization, another organization may not, right? And everything they do affects everyone. But I think you bring up a good point, because the more you customize, the harder it is to upgrade, and the more post-support, post-implementation support you need, and the more time it takes for your in-house folks to actually get the upgrade or patch applied and then test it to make sure that customization still works. So I think that's another, I know we'll get into that later. I keep jumping ahead a little bit, but I think that's really important for post-implementation.
I think that's a very valid point, Stephanie. And I think before we move on, we have a question from Jennifer, right? She says that, is today's use example just AMS example, or can learning be applied for other areas?
I think it can be, I didn't know if you wanted me to jump in or not, but I think that it can be applied for other areas, for particularly for big movements. Or if you're a really small organization, then I think it transcends beyond AMS. LMS is another good example of a pretty big muscle move.
Yeah, I think that's true. We have one more question, Stephanie, from David. He says, but I think he's talking more about customization. But isn't accountability an issue? Meaning, if things are not working the way you expected, the implementer may blame the software provider, and the software provider blames the implementer. At the end of the day, needs to function in the manner the client sought.
Very valid point. That'll be the most valid point. And that's where it comes back to, do you have a solid partnership? Right? Because you need the partnership with the vendor you purchase the solution from, and you need that true partnership, not just a vendor interaction, but a true partnership with an implementer and with your in-house team. So when I've been in that situation where I felt like one was sort of pointing at the other, I I'm pretty candid and pretty straightforward. I get everybody on a call. And I've actually said before, we're not going to end this call until we all agree with how we're going to solve what I need so that we can still support our members. Because at the end of the day, APA's members are the reason that we're here. So, but he's right. Just get them on a call and tell them nobody can get off until we figured it out.
Yeah, I think yeah, that is the best option out. Though he thinks Andy, there is Andy who thinks that this hypothesis never happens. So, but I think I can assure you, because Andy, that we have faced these situations before. We have worked with Stephanie, and Stephanie has been very good in getting these things sorted, because it's more of a collaborative issue, and if you resolve it collaboratively with the right kind of questions and answers, it gets resolved. We have practically seen that. So it's not hypothesis, it actually works.
No, it absolutely works. You have to have a level of accountability for every contributor to the solution. And that means, has your in-house team really thought through the process? Are we really able to identify what we're trying to solve and really being part of the solution? I have not been in a situation where I was only working with an implementation vendor and didn't have in-house team to help guide, support, and check. So I suppose if you're completely outsourcing it, then it's a little easier to just to point one way.
Yeah, that's true. I agree, Stephanie. We have one more questions. We are getting a lot of questions, Stephanie. Sorry about that. What so it's from an anonymous person. He says that, what about using a third party partner to manage the selection process or the implementation process, working with the vendor and in-house team?
I think that using a third party partner to help with the selection process, either for a vendor or the implementation, and leading up to that RFP, could be very smart. I think there's a lot of organizations that would really benefit from it, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't have an AMS yet, or you don't really know everything that's involved in it, or you haven't moved, you don't have the experience of moving from one AMS to another, a person like that or an entity like that could be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a smart question, and yeah, it is helpful based on our experience. So I think moving on, let's go to the next evaluation parameter, and it's about integration expertise. I know that is a very close topic of yours, where I understand that every association has a lot of legacy systems which they want to integrate, maybe at that point of time or maybe later. And so, what is your take in terms of how important is integration expertise for you to decide whether you should go for a product partner or a AMS implementation partner?
It's a big piece of the whole puzzle, for sure. For me, I think it's important to have that the integration partner has experience with it. Can they evaluate compatibility between what we're going to implement and our legacy systems? Can they look at the data structure and make recommendations, or see how it would fit together? Can we support SSO from this new software to existing legacy systems? I think it's also really important to engage those other vendors on the other half of the integration early in the process, because otherwise you could end up really blowing your budget, because you find out the cost for their work for this project. I also think it's important, and it's often overlooked with integrations, to go back and have integration evaluation included in your cybersecurity assessments that you really want to do at the end of something like this. It's a pretty specific area of expertise, but it shouldn't be overlooked.
Yeah. So, are you saying that when we are actually choosing the right partner, or when we are planning to choose the right product, right, is because I think integration is important at both the ends, whether you are choosing the product or the implementation partner, because the product that you're choosing, right, that should also be integrable with other systems, right? It You should never go for an AMS which cannot be integrated with any other third-party systems. It should There should be a API method or maybe some function that is easily called, which can actually integrate that AMS to other system. Now, in terms of expertise, right? How do you choose whether the partner you are choosing, right, has that kind of right expertise? Do you talk to them about any case studies they have done in terms of integration, or maybe talk to them and understand what their expertise is in terms of integration?
So I would include the uh, the systems that have to be integrated. It's just an absolute must. I would be sure that those were included in the RFP process and evaluation. I would want to see how it worked together. I would also really include that in evaluation, or, in reference checking. How did they handle it? How did it work? Did we have two vendors pointing like this at each other, like to the question we had earlier? I would also actually make sure that it was in the contract, probably, that it could integrate with certain things. You
Yeah.
can't overlook the
And
importance of a good contract in either one of these RFP situations.
do you think a lot of associations think about it beforehand when they are floating the RFP, or they are choosing the right
No,
partner or right AMS?
no, I don't. I think integration is overlooked as a given. We'll figure it out. And a little bit. I mean, you might have one or two big systems considered for integration on the top. But you might not think about that, some other smaller app that you only use once a year for a meeting. I think integration could use a little more visibility, the same way that I think that data migration is also really important. And I know we'll get in and we'll talk to that in a little bit, but
Yeah, I think you put the right evaluation parameter, which is data migration. I think which
mhm.
is our next parameter, evaluation parameter in terms of, I think it's implementation approach first. I think data migration will come later. So in terms of implementation approach, we have seen that uh, it plays a very important part in this whole execution, because a lot of teams are not structured in terms of implementation, in terms of preparing a plan for implementation, then following it, monitoring it, maybe giving status to associations on what they are doing, how they have implemented, or maybe including association members to test out their product. So, which approach or how much weightage will you give in terms of implementation, right? And is it the same for both in terms of product vendor and third party vendor, or is it you find it different for both these type of vendors?
I think that they ought to be the same for both of these type of vendors, because you're working to satisfy a requirement for your business, and you've learned how all of your internal stakeholders work. And you might have, like, we have followed a hybrid approach. Um, some 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 areas of the implementation team work better in agile. Others things need to happen in sort of a waterfall environment. But I would expect the same, whether it was the product vendor implementing it or a separate implementation partner.
Yeah, I think so. The implementation approach remains the same
Mhm.
for both the partners. Uh, and it actually depends on how good their team is or how good their project managers are.
I think that is really important. I think you have to have solid PMing for a project of this size and this magnitude. I think you have to be sure that everyone agrees on your key milestones. Um, I think it's really important to have stand-up recurring meetings 3 to 5 times a week. And because you find out quickly if you're going to have a problem, and you can usually solve those issues quicker, and remain on schedule and save your budget. You know, if the cost of having FTE time on stand-up calls and a vendor has proven itself to be worth it to me in the last 2 projects like this that I've done. And the last thing I would say about implementation approaches is, you know, really trust your team. Once you get the right group together, they're the subject matter experts. You need to get out of their way and trust what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that is a very valid answer in terms of that trust. I think trust is very important because that motivates the team as well. And I think that releases pressure from your side as well. We have a couple of questions before we move on, Stephanie. We have a question from Lynn. Lynn asks, if an association lacks reliable IT infrastructure or support, what key elements should be included in an RFP to ensure vendor accountability and protect the association's operational continuity?
Could you read that again for me?
Oh, okay. So what he's asking is, if an association does not have the required IT infrastructure or support, what key elements should be included in an RFP to ensure vendor accountability and protect operation continuity for the association?
I would say, from that perspective, to be sure that you have built-in project management time, because you're going to need more from them. You're going to need more and because they're going to have to do more for you, right? You are going to need more, in my experience, data migration. Instead of, if you don't have people in-house that can prepare data files to be uploaded and work with your partner, they're going to have to do more of it. So it will cost you more. You're also probably going to have them look more at evaluating the data to be sure that it's good, right? If you're really that short of people in-house.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in terms of IT infrastructure, if you don't have got that kind of reliable IT infrastructure, we should actually take help from the vendor itself in terms of maybe upgrading it, or maybe trying to find ways to improve it, right? Because a lot of vendors have that kind of capability, and you should actually look for a vendor who has got that kind of capability where he can actually support you in terms of IT infrastructure as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And
so
we
I
have one
missed
more
the point
question.
I missed the whole point of that question, the IT infrastructure, which is completely separate from this project, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Just say I missed it. I apologize. No, IT infrastructure is a separate vendor, whole separate conversation from this one, for sure.
That's true.
Yeah.
I
No, I
think that should be
apologize.
that should be handled separately, right? By
Yes.
the maybe in-house team or maybe by the stakeholders.
Yes.
We have a question from Andy. He says that just because things can integrate also doesn't specify how well and with what depth of scope.
Agreed. The integrations are, I mean, APA, I'm not even going to say the number. We have a lot of points of data that we integrate, they work together. And Andy, I agree with that. You have to be really careful with it, and you need to get the people that know what those integrations are doing, or what that other software is doing, involved early.
Yeah, I think so. It's important because there are a lot of things to integrate. So I don't know, like, because integration is a wide ocean, Stephanie, where it's not just one integration, right? So we get requests from client that can you integrate with this, right? Where we don't have actually an idea about or a clue about what that system is all about, right? And then we have to tell them that, oh, we don't have that kind of expertise, but if you give us some time, so maybe we can analyze and refer to you to someone, or maybe we study it and try those things. Because I don't think so any specific supplier can be an expert in all the integrations. As per my experience, he cannot be an master of all integrations.
Agreed. And another issue you run into is that when you're working on setting up this type of vendor, it's usually a limited team of people that are trying to do it, and they don't know all the integrations. They don't know the scope for them. They're in many situations, they're doing the best they can because, oh, by the way, in a lot of situations, their workload hasn't been reduced in order to figure out this RFP and figure out how to solve this problem for the organization 12 months down the road. So, I think good request forms out to people. I mean, there are ways you can manage it, but I agree with you.
Yeah. We are getting a flurry of questions. So one more question we have from Chris. He joined a bit late. So what he's asking is, what is your suggested approach in terms of drafting a RFP for product testing versus the actual build? For context, my organization would like to validate some of the proposed solutions before we invest the time and money to build them out fully.
So I think what Chris is describing sounds like a proof of concept. And I think that there are vendors that can do some of that. I've worked on smaller RFPs where we had vendors that would come with that. For an AMS implementation, I haven't met a vendor yet that would do that for you, that would go to that level. We have, during evaluation, said, and RFP preparation said, here's our top 3 use cases. Show us how you handle them. And we've given background about our membership or the event we need to support or whatever those couple of high priority goals are for us. And they can usually address those. But I haven't met a vendor yet for something this big that would actually do a test build for us without us paying them.
Yeah, I think a lot of vendors do maybe a paid POC kind of stuff where maybe if you include that in the budget, I don't know. But in my opinion, if you're doing a POC for an AMS, it's almost like implementing an AMS, right? It's not a small POC you can do. It would be like implementing everything because there are so many features you have to do.
Yeah, and it would take, I think if you're thinking about that, and even if you're willing to pay, as I see in here, then how much time is it going to take from your team? And if you do that, make sure that everything is documented lockstep. So if you go that route and it worked, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You take the documents, you take the SOPs, you take the requirements, and you haven't wasted, or you're really making good use of your team's time.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think let's move on to the next slide. So I know we have, once you implement the AMS, right? I think that is where the real test starts, right? Because that is when everybody is on the system and it's a new system for them. There is a lot of expectation of users, and I think if you have not got that kind of post implementation support for those users, it actually switches them off from the system, right? They don't want to use it because they are getting issues and then there is no one to resolve them. So I think post implementation support is important. And in terms of product vendor and third party vendors, right? What is your opinion on terms of, so how do you rate them in terms of post implementation support, and do you actually factor this post implementation support in your RFP?
I would, yes, for sure. And I, again, feel a little like for the size of organizations I've worked with, that the implementation partner would be separate from the vendor. I do support that. And because my experience is that your implementation partner, if they could support you well during the implementation, they're also excited about you going live. And they want to be sure that the work they've done actually goes well. So, I'd be thinking of, sorry, I completely lost my train of thought. I would be thinking about for post-implementation support, how fast can we reach them? Some standard things. How fast can we reach them? Are we talking via phone? Sometimes that's better. Immediately post-implementation for staff that are trying to get used to a system. I would want to have some monitoring in place of performance, finding out, and evaluating how many issues we have, because that could tell us that we need to go back and look at an area, right? Maybe a customization isn't working exactly the way we want, or, we need to look at that. I also think that when you go live with a new system, if there are folks on site in a building, that you need to walk around and say, hi, how's it going? And if you also have a lot of people working remotely, you ought to have a Zoom session that's open all day for them to join as they want. And I would typically ask my implementation partner to support that by also just being in the call and being available for anyone. That I've seen that be really successful.
Yeah. And I think so. How do you evaluate whether that partner would be actually, and what is your experience based on the type of vendors we have worked with, on type of, like you talked about, he should be responsive, because I think that is the key thing when you are taking support from someone. So how responsive do you find these two types of vendors in terms of support?
My experience is that the implementation partner that is not the actual vendor has more capacity and capability to provide post-implementation support. I
Yeah.
think it's really tough, and I'm not trying to say anything negative towards the vendor, for sure, because I think their focus is on the product, and their implementation services are usually around only off the shelf, and the environments I've been in have involved a lot of customizations.
Yeah, I think that's true. So obviously it actually, I think, depends on the type of requirements that you have that would actually help you evaluate, which I think we will see in the last slide on how we should evaluate vendors on what parameters. So I
Mm-hmm.
think everyone can have a different parameter, and that is on the basis of which they actually can choose whether they want to go for a
Mm-hmm.
product vendor or a third party vendor. So I think let's move to the last parameter in our list, which is the data migration. I
Mm-hmm.
think that is something which actually make things fall, right? We have we have done a lot of data migrations, and there is where things fall apart, where you have so many issues with data, you have missing data, you have inconsistent information, which actually leads to a lot of errors in reports, and then members not getting data correctly, someone seeing someone else information. So I think
Mm-hmm.
this is an area which needs expertise in terms of migration. And if I think someone has not done that before and doing for the first time, I think then you are prepared for a mess.
I think I think so. And this is what I think is a little bit overlooked, and it's so important as you're looking at RFPs, or you're preparing RFPs. You've got to get the data migration team, whoever your expert is in that area, needs to participate, because they can ask the vendor or potential vendors during demos the types of questions that you're going to need to know 4 weeks before go live. I think that this area doesn't get the focus that it should ahead of time usually. I think we're getting better about it, but you know, you need to have discussions about with your potential implementation partner, how they've gone about it before. How can they help you evaluate um, how long data migrations will take? I was involved in a situation where I heard okay, this will be quick. And then they came back and said it's going to take 3 weeks to move this amount of data. And we didn't have 3 weeks. We were, you know, we did not have 3 weeks of runway. So I went back to the CEO and said, I'm not going to make that deadline. And that's not a conversation that I'm fond of having. So whatever you can do up front to learn about the amount of data you have and what your what your subject matter experts tell you about moving data and the shape of your data. I mean, you can't forget that, you know, part of being able to get your data migrated is all that work on the front end. Is it clean? Is it accurate? Do you trust it? All right. Have you thought about how much data you actually should move? Do you have data retention and destruction policies for your organization? So if you have 20 years of data in an older LMS, you're only bringing over 5 years. You're only bringing 7. So you have to get buy-in from finance. You have to get buy-in, you know, you have to have a lot of visibility, and that those kinds of questions asked up front will help quite a bit. I have I've just seen it go badly when you didn't do that. When you try to just pick up your data and move it to a new environment, it doesn't work. So you've got to really give some thought to that.
Yeah. So I think data migration, I think, should be one of very important aspects that we should look in an RFP in terms of how much of data are we actually talking of migrating? What is the size of it? And I think one of the things that a lot of associations miss is the consistency, or the whether that data is good or bad, right? Whether you are actually migrating bad data into a new system and creating more bad data into it, or is your vendor actually helping you clean that data first and then migrate?
Yes. And that also, I view that as a separate project.
Yeah.
And that there's so much work that should happen before you get to where you're migrating data into a new AMS.
Yeah. I think these all are parameters where you can talk endlessly, right? Giving real examples of how they affect, right? It's very difficult to cover them in one webinar, but I think we have tried to cover it as much as possible. And I think the whole crunch of this webinar is to, and you might have different parameters in which you want to evaluate your vendor. So these are just our opinion on what parameters you should think, but I think there can be more parameters which might affect you, right? I think one of the parameters, Stephanie, which associations might be interested in is the size of the organization, right? Where what size of the organization is, I think that would actually change a lot of parameters in terms of the things that we have talked about.
I agree with that. And I've been in environments where the amount of data that the organization had actually broke software we had purchased and were trying to use. So I think the size of both your staff and your, in a case of associations, your membership information, you know, I think you have to consider that a lot.
Yeah. And I think the last part that we actually want to, which is actually the crux of what we have discussed, is the evaluation sample sheet, which you can use to, I think we have left one more parameter, sorry. It's about ongoing managed services. I think we have talked about it in terms of continued support and upgrades and training. So maybe we can skip this and move to the more important part, which is more of the evaluation metrics, I think, which is very good. So how, what is this metrics, Stephanie, in terms of, I know it's a simple metrics that you might be using for your RFP. Do you want to educate the audience in terms of how they should be using it, and what does it mean? How does it look like?
Sure, I can do that. I think that as you work with your whole organization to come up with, you know, at the very beginning of this talk, we talked about defining requirements, and the importance of each of these pieces to you. Like, for example, we just talked about data migration experience. And in this example you gave us, it's weighted at 15. Well, you might be an organization that has a lot of data and a lot of moving parts and a lot of integrations. So you might choose to weight that higher. You know, you would move this around based on what your needs were. Or you might be a smaller organization that you know you're not going to customize much because it's just beyond what you're able to do. So I think as you look through what you evaluate each part, each of the things that we've talked about, you can have them weighted for whatever you want. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk through the other scores here.
Yeah, I think so. This is just a sample one, and as you talked about, right, this weightage can vary. So, like you talked about that, we have given a weightage of 15 to data migration. Now, depending on the size of data, right? So it may be that you have loads of maybe 20 years of data to be migrated to the new system. So I think if I am an association, I would give it a weightage of maybe 25 or 30, right? Because that is something that would take precedence over other parameters, because I would be looking for someone who has huge amount of expertise in it, right? Who has done a lot of data migrations before. I think similarly with integration with existing systems. So if we are talking about, and we know that we have got maybe 40-50 legacy systems in which we are working, right? So, and if you want to integrate our AMS with this, so I would maybe give maybe a score of 25 to instead of 15. So I think what we have done, so I think these parameters, and even these parameters, Stephanie, like we are talking, they can vary, right? So maybe if you are a smaller organization and you are actually looking for just out of the box, so this customization capability will not take precedence. We can maybe just give it a score of 5 even.
And you might find that post-implementation support is higher if you're that smaller, if you have smaller support in-house. You know you're going to need more support.
That's true. And I think so I think what we have done is, based on our assumptions, we have just tried to build this matrix and put a score of for the product company and the third party vendor, like you said, for in terms of post implementation support, right? Third party vendors are better. So maybe you can evaluate them 4 and maybe give 3 to the product vendor. In terms of integrations, they might be same or they might vary. Customizations, like third party would be better than product. And then there would be approach where, because it's their own product, they might have a better implementation approach, the product vendor, rather than a third party vendor. So we have given different scores and then multiplied these scores with the weightage to get a final product score, and then sum them up. So in terms of here, maybe based on my requirements, I've given a lot of importance to implementation approach and then data migration expertise. So maybe there is a very small difference. The product company weighs 3.5, third party weighs 3.8. Maybe based on your requirements, you may have a different result. But I think this is a good metrics to evaluate and decide on the vendor, so that you have a definite approach and you choose the right AMS implementation partner, whether it's the product vendor or the third party implementation vendor, it doesn't matter. But I think if we make the right choice initially, if it is correct, then I think our implementation process and the whole ROI of the system would be better.
Yeah, and I would add that I think it's important for everyone involved in the process to understand and use and benefit from the evaluation matrix. So someone doesn't think their area got shorted. Everyone has the opportunity to help determine the weightage.
Yeah. And I think, do you think that this should be a part of the initial RFP process when we are talking to a lot of stakeholders to get their approval?
I think so. And in fact, I've used different matrix aside from this one, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think we have covered everything, Stephanie, for this webinar. And we would be doing more of these educational webinars where we can actually tell you like what is the best practices, how you should actually choose things. And our webinars are unique in a way because they are based on the real life experience, real time experiences of our experts. So tuned in for these webinars. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for taking time and enlightening us with such useful information. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
Enjoyed being
and thank
here.
You. Yeah. And thank you everyone for the webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.